Good morning. Now, over a month since Kenyans went to the ballot to elect their various leaders, and yesterday the swearing in of President William Ruto marked the end of the political season in Kenya. Tens of heads of state, thousands of Kenyans in Kasarani, outside Kasarani, and also millions watching in the comfort of their homes. That culminated into swearing in of Kenya's fifth president. And one evident thing is that the new president actually went straight to work. A number of austerity measures to more or less try and breathe life into the ailing Kenyan economy, and some decrees that he ended up signing executive orders yesterday. That just shows how the president is ready to jumpstart his fifth administration. Now, that will be forming bulk of what we will be discussing today. There are a number of goodies and a number of measures that will be put in place to ensure that the fifth administration will be getting back to work. And Kenyans from all walks of life want one thing in common: the cost of living to come down and the economy. We breathe life into the ailing economy. That will be forming bulk of what we'll be discussing today. My name is Njue. This is KBC News Check, and we are glad that you are watching. We are live from the broadcasting house here in the county of Nairobi, and also on all our social media platform. And to help me drive this conversation, I'm joined by an advocate of the High Court who is also a governance and leadership expert, Wambui, Shadrack. Counsel, good morning.
Morning, Njue. It's always a pleasure to be here, and good morning to our viewers back at home and to our listeners.
Thank you so much. And maybe in a nutshell, just to mention some of the things that the president mentioned yesterday, which of course, as I said, that will be forming bulk of what we'll be discussing today. The head of state has had some goodies, as well as some of the things that Kenyans will have to relook carefully. One of the things is the KBC, which is said that, of course, we will be having a look at that education system, and also the fuel subsidies is something that he said that we need to relook at those things, because of course having the fuel subsidy has stretched our budget and actually also eaten into some of the development budget. But we will be putting those figures into perspective. But some of the things that he talked about, he's gonna swear. A lot of media houses are writing 6 judges of the appellate court, actually 4 judges, 1 registrar, and one chief magistrate, and also increase the funding to the judiciary. That is something that I'm quite sure the legal fraternity will be keen to look at. Financial autonomy of the police to be executed, a clearing of goods to revert to the port of Mombasa, fuel subsidy and unga subsidy not a solution, as I had put that. Farmers are going to benefit as we head to the short rains. 1.4 million bags of fertilizer available at a subsidized price of 3,500. That will commence from next week. Nairobi, any person doing business in Nairobi will of course be touched by these 20 new markets to be built in Nairobi City Council. We talked about Hustler Fund to make credit affordable, low-cost housing program aiming at 250,000 units every year. Jokali to provide customized product for the housing program, and pending bills to be cleared as a matter of priorities. And this will be touching more on the counties, which also have huge numbers when it comes to the pending bills. Allow me now to dig in the conversation, and we will also be joined by Churchill Saoke, who is a leadership and governance expert and also a lecturer at the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. Council, first things first, what the head of state talked about yesterday is something that had been lingering all around since the former president Uhuru Kenyatta refused to swear in the 4 judges and the 2 officers of the court. But yesterday, not only did he actually sign that, he also added 2 more judges. These 2 or 4 judges.
Well, Njue, first, at the very outset, let me begin by congratulating the 5th President of the Republic of Kenya and the 2nd Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya. Remember the old traditions that we had Vice Presidents as opposed to Deputy Presidents. So I pass my felicitations, or rather congratulatory message to the President and his Deputy, Rigathi Gachagua. Now, I also followed keenly. I was watching as the proceedings at Kasarani were going on, and I acknowledge that there was some very good promises that we had as members of the public from the President of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. William Ruto, and I agree to some extent that indeed there was some writing on the wall, especially following his declaration as the President-elect on the 15th day of August 2022, and subsequently following the confirmation or the validity of his election as the President on the 5th day of September by the Supreme Court of Kenya. So indeed there was some indication, even prior to his inauguration as the President of the Republic, that he had some serious work to do, and he had deliberately told us that he has set some measures in place to ensure, first, that there is the promotion of the independence of the judiciary, and secondly, there is some deliberate measures that have been put to ensure the promotion of the independence of the National Police Service, the NPS. And of course, he had mentioned even previously that he had contrived some ways by way of executive orders that are going to be made to ensure that we reduce the cost of living as we know of it today. So really, it did not come to me as a shocker that what the promises that he gave previously were confirmed yesterday. No, what indeed was quite surprising to me, and of course, which sits well within me as a practicing advocate of the High Court of Kenya, and of course as a practicing constitutional lawyer, is that the speed at which he resolved to end the previous stalemate that we had between the executive and the judiciary as far as the promotion of the 6 judges is concerned. So that we can clarify to the viewers and to the listeners, is that we have 4 judges of the High Court of Kenya who were elevated 3 years ago by the Judicial Service Commission. But since their elevation, or the recommendation for their elevation to the Court of Appeal, there was a stalemate, because the President, the retiring President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, had a feeling arising from some report that he had received from the National Intelligence Service, the NIS, touching on the credibility, or rather on some of the misconducts, if at all, from some of these judges. And again, I must mention that there was a deputy registrar who also sits in the capacity of a magistrate, by way of assisting judges in discharging their role and responsibilities as judges, who was also elevated to be sitting as a High Court judge. There was also a chief magistrate who was previously, and this is Mheshimiwa Makori, who was previously sitting as the chief magistrate in Mombasa, and subsequently transferred to Kericho, and who was also recommended to be elevated to the High Court. But since the report did not sit very well with those recommendations, the then President, the retiring President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, had thought that these people did not be fit, or were rather not fit for the elevation to either the High Court or the Court of Appeal. So in a sense, it brought some discomfort, especially in view of what we understand to be the independence of the Constitution, the independence of the judiciary, and the independence of the constitutional commissions that we have. And this, to speak, is the Judicial Service Commission, because it's an independent commission which is charged with the responsibility of ensuring that we employ and we discipline judges and judicial staff as and when the need arises. So really, from where I sit, there is a sense in which I join others in celebrating the quick speed in which the President, Rais Ruto, has moved in ensuring that we have the elevation of these six judges to the position that they were elevated to. So, we must also look back into history. We must look back into what really were the reasons for the president refusing to appoint these judges, as it were. So that even while we jubilate on what has transpired, because I am actually in jubilation, and I'm actually expecting that we will be seeing in a short while the swearing in of these judges as judges of the Court of Appeal and the High Court. But one thing that we must ask ourselves, there was a live question that was being litigated at the Court of Appeal, and this is to what really is the role of the president, or is there a role of the president after the recommendation has been done to him by the Judicial Service Commission on the appointment of people or individuals as judges, either of the High Court, the Court of Appeal. That was the question, the live question.
And indeed, even the president, the new president, talked about it during his campaigns, because indeed it is the Judicial Service Commission that has been mandated to ensure that they give out the right candidates. So, meaning the Judicial Service Commission had already done its due diligence, and not only had they done their due diligence, they had done the interviews, and everything was already completed. But the fact that the head of state back then, 3 years ago, refused to gazette them brings a question, why? And why? Because the law is very clear. The president was supposed to gazette them, but he did not do that.
Yes, indeed, I acknowledge, and that is why I mentioned the live question that is before or was before. I mean, it has already been made moot or for academic purposes. But the question that was asked is whether the president becomes a rubber stamp after the recommendations have been made by the Judicial Service Commission, which I think is a very interesting question that probably, if time will have allowed, we will have also wished to understand from the Court of Appeal, now that the issue had been settled at the High Court. And now, you see, the retired president, Uhuru Kenyatta's refusal to appoint these people is not really my biggest issue here. My biggest issue is, why did he sit on that report? So that should it then have been the responsibility of the president, William Ruto, to now that he's privy now to the information, because he's now the sitting state, he's now the sitting president. Now that he's privy to the information, this privy information that led to the refusal by Uhuru Kenyatta to lead to the appointment of these people, would he, in his capacity now, have channeled the report? Because this is the argument now that is between lawyers.
Yes.
Will he have channeled the report to the Judicial Service Commission, and the Judicial Service Commission having powers either to act on its own motion, to recommend for disciplinary proceedings of judges and even magistrates? Will it have now sat well within now law and probably even reason for him to have channeled the report for now the deliberation or recommendation, so that the Judicial Service Commission, sitting as a disciplinary body, looks at the report, and then if there is any sinister question, or if there is any conduct of any judge that has been called to question, then these judges are called upon to respond to those questions. So will it then have been the proper way of going, or will we now continue just jubilating, knowing too well that what is in that report will never be acted upon? We will never know past probably the reactions from the retiring president of declining to make the recommendation. What is in those reports that forms part of the interesting reading that probably the citizens will want to know?
And I know, as a lawyer, you have so many questions, because at the end of the day, this is something that can replicate, because we do not know if there will be other judges where a sitting president, we are not talking about even Ruto, even in future, where he can sit on that report but not tell Kenyans exactly why I did not assent to this. But indeed, we are waiting for the new judges are actually going to be sworn in today. 2 more Environment and Land Court judges were also gazetted yesterday by the head of state. And allow me now to bring in Dr. Churchill Saoke. I'm quite sure you were following yesterday's inauguration and swearing in keenly. What were your take home?
Thanks, Ben. I think first let me take this opportunity to congratulate the 5th President of the Republic of Kenya for the and also for the people of Kenya for the smooth transition of power, for the fourth time. And this is quite a milestone in our democracy. I'm sure that a number of the heads of states who had joined the people of Kenya in the inauguration yesterday must have marveled at who we are as a nation. You know, it was it sort of exhibited the nation as great and the people as mature and our democracy as progressing. And I think this is one of the things that we have to appreciate as a country and continue to work more to build our institutions. You know, there are a lot of things that came into play yesterday, ranging from the speeches of the deputy president and the president and also the colorful nature of the event, of the handing over of the instruments of power and things like that. And I mean, these are things to be proud of as a nation. There are things to be proud of as a nation. Of course, there are a lot of expectation of the new regime. As usual, Kenyans will always be expectant. And you know, it's interesting how when you come in as a new president and when you are leaving as an outgoing president, there is always a big contrast. Yes. But this is always expected in any electoral system.
And looking at still the judiciary and Wambui, I'm quite sure this is something that will actually fortify the rule of law and also access to justice, just as the CJ has always said. 3 billion shillings additional funding for the judiciary. That is something that's going to breathe life. There are some court sessions that have not yet been completed. CJ has always said that we indeed are trying to work with what we have. And do you see the new head of state actualizing the judiciary fund just as he promised?
Well, the consolidated fund, the judiciary fund, as you want to mention, I mean, it was already put in place on the first day of July 2022, and this is an acknowledgement that you even heard from the speech made by the head of state, William Ruto, so that it is now water under the bridge. The only point of focus will be whether we are going to have an increase in the fund that has been that goes to that kitty. And one thing that we must recognize is I mean, I must commend Dr. Ruto for at least the kind of step that he has taken, that of mending the relationship between the judiciary and the executive. Remember, we are coming from a past where we had a strained relationship between the executive and the judiciary, and this is largely attributed to some of the very fierce positions or rather robust decisions that the judiciary has been making in the previous past. Recall that in the year 2017, on the first day of September, immediately after the annulment or rather the declaration of the election of President Ruto, President Uhuru then and his deputy Ruto then was invalidated by the Supreme Court, being headed by Emeritus retired Chief Justice Kenani David Maraga. Recall that after the budget of the year 2017-2018, it's the year 2018-2019 budget year, we had I mean the budget allocation for the judiciary was cut almost to half. And this was really a reaction that was this was a reaction following the annulment of the win that the then president had secured with his deputy, who is current president. So and we saw the LSK, the Law Society of Kenya, going to court to push for the nullification of the budget allocation that had been given to the judiciary. And you know, financial autonomy is really at the core of what you will call your independence. And we have seen every time when the judiciary has to rely so much on the executive as far as the budget allocation is concerned, that is where the independence of the judiciary is actually stifled. That is where we have our independence as the judicial or the judiciary as an independent arm of government interfered with. And you will also recognize that from the speech that was made by the President Ruto is that he recognizes that some of the interference we had with the National Police Service, especially from by the executive, was largely due to the financial dependency that the National Police Service has and the financial dependency that the judiciary has been having. Now, giving us the autonomy and also increasing the budget allocation is essentially meant to ensure that the judiciary will be doing as and what it pleases to do, so that it does not have to rely on goodwill. Remember, the English man and woman, and probably Daktari will even say it even better, that he who pays the piper who will call the tune. So that right now, if we do not have a judiciary that is so dependent on the executive, it means that we are going to enjoy some level of independence. You've heard the mention of the increase in the number of the small claims courts. These small claims courts are actually meant to address some of the common, the problems that we face as common wananchi, the likes of you and me, the likes of the other hoipolois living in Rongai, in Madare, in other, some of these marginalized areas. The kind of debts that we have, the economic problems that we have, is I lend you 10,000, I lend Daktari 100,000, and Daktari has refused to pay me back. Yes. So that we do not have to go through the vigorous process of commercial courts. We are now to resort to resolving our disputes through the small claims court that have a time frame. They should settle their disputes within 2-3 months. So, and that is provided in law, so that we also open up our economic growth as a country. Because when you have refused to pay back my money, it means I am not going to grow economically as an individual.
Indeed.
Yes.
And Doc, I will still want you to dig into that, because looking at what the head of state said yesterday just shows you how committed he is in making these institutions that Kenyans pay taxes each and every month are quite autonomous. Looking at what he said about the National Police Service and looking at what he's now doing in terms of the judiciary, the 3 billion shillings are going to go a long way, just as Wakili talked about the small claims court, so that we may finish up with what really delays a lot of cases in court, which end up spending a lot of money, and at the end of the day, you don't feel like you have gotten enough justice.
Yes, it's important to analyze this issue from the basis of where we come from as a country. Remember, before the promulgation of the Constitution and prior, even before the second liberation, we used to have institutions that were extremely centralized. And in systems that are centralized, they are prone to personalization and charisma of individuals. And the impact is that patronage then determines the success of any institution in terms of it executing its mandate. So there has been a lot of failures of those kinds of systems, especially in states that have not yet developed in their democracy and the institutionalization of systems and processes. When you look at when we promulgated our Constitution in 2010, those were some of the failures that the Constitution wanted to look at in our national institutions. How do we make our institutions independent to an extent that they can execute their functions irrespective of who is in power? All right? And one of the ways in which you do that is giving institutions their mandate, clearly aligning their mandate and defining their mandate, and after you have defined their mandates, you help them to achieve those mandates by giving them resources. And not just giving them resources, availing these resources in a manner that they can easily be able to get them whenever they need them and account for them once they use them. So this is the basis of creating independent institutions that can execute independent mandates and processes. You have them, you give them independent mandates and give them independence in terms of finances and budgetary allocation. And I think this is where the head of state is coming from. He's trying to read through what our Constitution really wanted. And when you look at issues objectively, any independent institution, and I can assure you, Ben, if today you became the head of any institution in this country, be it a parastatal or wherever, your performance will be dependent on the resources and how these resources are availed to you. If these resources are availed to you in a manner that they're availed to you adequately and you can access them whenever you need it, you will perform. And I think this is something that is good news to the courts. They can, and the other thing that the head of state has done politically is that, I have given you everything you need. If you fail, Kenyans will not blame me, they'll blame you.
Yes, and Wakili, we have seen presidents sign an executive order. And maybe you can shed light more on executive orders, because one of the things he did yesterday was to sign an executive order. And one of the things he also talked about during his campaigns was about the port of Mombasa. He said that it's going to be taken back to Mombasa where it initially was, and he was going to sign an executive order on the same. How far can an executive order go, and can it be challenged? Because I'm quite sure a lot has been invested in Naivasha, that's the inland container depot, but now all that is going back to Mombasa. Of course, is a ripple effect, taking from one side and giving to the other side. But that is an executive order. How far can we stretch an executive order to the point that it cannot be challenged in court, or can it be challenged in court?
Well, you see, the office of the president is a creature of the Constitution, so that the president actually swears, and you saw it yesterday when he was lifting the Bible with his right hand, and then placing the left arm on the Constitution, so that we must acknowledge that he borrows his power from the Constitution. Now, the Constitution under Article 140 or thereabout gives, or rather mandates the president to be making the decisions through written directives, so that it is no longer what was called road signs or roadsides declarations. No, we have now moved to a situation or a stage where the president is by law expected, if he's making any directive, to write the directive down, so that when you are called to question as a government officer, having done something that you are saying the president told you, what we'll be telling you is, was there a written directive towards you that told you to do X and to refrain from doing Y, so that you do not necessarily have to say, I was only told orally by the president. Now, we have reduced, and this is just to summarize that, we have reduced the work of the president as far as directions are concerned to be written directions. Now, when you read Article 10 of the Constitution on the national values and principles of governance, it tells us that every time any person, including any state organ, any state authority, is making any decision, is coming up with any policy, as we have seen the president do in the recent declaration that he made yesterday, and the executive orders that he's supposed to sign and the ones that he has signed, is that they must have some grounding in law. It does not necessarily mean that the president is all powerful and is not within the directives of the law. No, the president must do or must give directions that conform to the law as we know of it. And we have seen in the recent past that we have seen executive orders, the executive order transferring functions of the Kenya Meat Commission to the military. That question was taken before the court. To be particular, Justice Anthony Mrima. And Justice Anthony Mrima declared those executive orders to be unconstitutional. So there is nothing that prevents us, if there is any grounding in law, to proceed to court, because the court is the final sayer of what is right and what is wrong, so that the court can declare itself on the correctness, the legality of, or the constitutionality of what has been directed through an executive order. Now, and especially in view of the transfer of the port from Naivasha back to Mombasa, I think this is something that has received some mixed reactions. Yes. And these mixed reactions are not without any foundation. in any event, if you were to thoroughly reflect, you know, on one hand, our people living at the coast, of course, you know, were depending so much on those clearing works. You hear kuna wale wanaitwa watu wa kupakia akina kuli. So these are people who relied so much on the port so that they could bring some bread on their table. Now, with the transfer of the functions, you know, what was happening at the port to Naivasha, it essentially meant two things. Number one, it meant that our brothers and sisters who are relying on the port in Mombasa to get their livelihood, of course, did not you know, that decision did not sit very well with them because their source of livelihood was actually taken away from them. But now, the people who are living either in Naivasha or around Naivasha also got another opportunity. People who were unemployed before the transfer of these things to Naivasha, then they also got employment. Now, with the retransfer of the functions of the port from Naivasha now back to Mombasa, it essentially means that those people who are benefiting from that Naivasha, you know, what is happening in Naivasha, are not going to be beneficiaries. And that must explain why the mixed reaction is there. But now, there needs to be some, you know, some cost-benefit analysis to be done, so that Kenyans must be persuaded from our economists, not from a populist view, because some of us, as a lawyer, may not be very well, you know, grounded on matters economy. But we must make sense of the economic implications of the decision that has been made by the head of state, President Ruto, so that we need to be guided. Does it you know, cost the taxpayer more by transferring the functions from Mombasa to Naivasha as opposed to doing everything at the port? Probably from a human perspective, just a hoi polloi and just a reasonable man's perspective, I would think it will be less costly to do everything at the port of Mombasa as opposed to bringing everything to an inland port.
And it's a good thing you brought about that, because, Daktari, perhaps you can chip in. Now there's a lot of money involved. Of course, the people in Mombasa are quite happy that the port is back. In Naivasha, the inland container depot, they're going to talk about, oh, we have been shortchanged. But at the end of the day, the port is going to be taken back to Mombasa, just as the president said. And of course, the financial implication, there's a ripple effect in terms of the money that was spent to make the ICD, that the inland container depot in Naivasha, are now being taken back to Mombasa and just being left. There was an infrastructure that was there already.
Yes, you know, these are policy options that any person in a policy decision-making organ will have to grapple with, and its implications. And I'm sure that you got to look at the legal implications, the implications in terms of trade, and even other relationships that could be bilateral. When you look at the legal implications, one, there are, you know, there are certain agreements that may have been made with certain companies or certain governments as during the construction of this infrastructure. And this kind of pronouncements, then we must ask ourselves what is going to be the implication of that, because, you know, it is one thing politically, it makes every sense to return the port to Mombasa. It's going to help people, and people are going to be happy with it. But then at the back end, there were commitments, and I'm sure there are commitments that government made, and what is going to be the financial implications of these commitments? Are we going to be forced to pay certain monies back? So those are things that we might not be privy to, but I'm sure that the policymakers will have to grapple with. The other issues are those relating with the multilateral obligations that may have come as a result of you know, the constructions of these kind of things. You know, you know, some of these projects were done at very high levels of government, and when you do projects at high levels of government, there are a lot of bilateral engagements that are involved, and so those kind of relationships also will have to be managed. So in as much as it makes a lot of sense to the common man, there are a lot of management of relationships, management of legal obligations that will really need to be dealt with, that are even way beyond the amount of the number of people who are going to lose jobs in Naivasha. The other thing is that, of course, the infrastructure that have already been built, as you have alluded to, that has already been built there, we might then ask ourselves that, are we going to leave it obsolete? Yet huge monies had been invested there. We might need then to find other ways of making it important, because you see, that port was relevant because the SGR was bringing, they used to bring goods from Mombasa to that place. So it means with goods now not being transported to the ICD, it then remains, that line then remains, ideally it remains useless commercially. So we then must ask ourselves, are we going to leave it as an elephant project, or are we going to make create another thing, or extend the line so that it becomes useful? So those are the policy decisions that the government really has to think of, so that because you see, one of the things that, and these are things that are expected for any regime, whenever any regime comes, the president and the head of state has to find ways and means of making quick gains on anything that he finds. Like, for example, he got the judges. That's a quick gain, you know. He does directives and it's thrown in and people are happy, you know. The inland pop, that's another quick gain, you know. And there are going to be many other quick gains that will be useful for purposes of just winning the public that, you know, I'm into this game and I'm ready to work.
Yes, and I'm quite sure that is something that has already started generating debate on even social media on the Mombasa port. But still on autonomy, something that has never happened since independence, where the National Police Force or service now is quite independent from the executive, where they will be having the IG will be the accounting officer. That is something that has never happened. And one of the reasons that they gave, and it was actually in one of the campaigns that they were talking about, and the deputy president did talk about that very passionately yesterday, the use of the criminal justice system to what he said that to weaponize politics or anybody who is against you politically. But that is not going to happen again. But what does the Constitution say is that the National Police Service is supposed to be under the bracket of the executive. How does this go? How does it transit?
Njue, not quite. The National Police Service is not supposed to be under the executive.
That's what is happening right now.
Yes. You know, that is what is in practice. Yes, that is
actually
what
since independence.
Yes. And you see, it's because of the enforcement bit. That is why the police, and they have always been used and misused. And you know, we have brothers and sisters who are serving in the National Police Service, in the KDF, all this. But you see, there is something very novel about our Constitution, especially if you reverse to, or you return and read Article 245. Article 245 gives the autonomy to the National Police Service. Now this independence to be exercised in decision making, so that even while you read, and I am actually part of the lawyers that have been at the center of the interpretation between Article 157(4) of the Constitution and Article 245(4) of the Constitution, because on one hand, you read under Article 157(4) of the Constitution that the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions, has power to direct the IG, the Inspector General of Police, to do some investigations when there is some criminal conduct that has been that has arisen somewhere. So and when you read that, you also must read not in isolation but together with Article 245(5) 4 of the Constitution, where the IG, the Inspector General of Police, is given autonomy in his investigations. And in fact, it is, when you read the express, if you had the Constitution, you will even have highlighted for the benefit of the viewers that the Inspector General of Police should not be directed by any person, including the CS. on the investigation on any particular individual, on any particular offense or offenses. So that he must be given some level of autonomy when it comes to investigations. And I must applaud the President, William Ruto, or especially on this one, that where the financial autonomy or independence of the National Police Service under the leadership of the Inspector General of Police and to some extent the Directorate of Criminal Investigations, because he responds to the IG, is in a sense meant to professionalize what he's been saying all along. Is meant to professionalize the National Police Service, so that we do not have people who are relying, on their movements, on their budgets, are relying so heavily on the executive. So that if we need to go somewhere, if we have a course, if we have uniforms that we need to buy, we must please you as the sitting head of state, so that you can give us the uniforms or money to go and buy uniforms. I think that independence is long overdue. We expected of it. And we've been representing clients, especially in these 10 years that we have seen. And we have seen, the use of police is just very historical. You saw it even during the Kibaki, even the Kibaki era. You saw it during the Moi era, when we used to use, and even the Kenyatta era, when they came up with an offense called robbery with violence. And they said that by law, if you are charged with robbery with violence, then you cannot get cash bail. So that people who are political dissents will be arrested and detained, knowing too well that, of course, the trial will not take place within 2 or 3 days. But for the period of time when you will not be enjoying your right to bail, they will be now, forming up some political outfits, organizing and mobilizing, and with an aim of reducing your influence to the populace or to the people. Now, we have seen it. So what the president has done now is just but to rewrite history, to ensure that we do not have the problems that we've been having, to ensure that even him, at a time when he will be experiencing some political dissent, he will not use the National Police Service. He will not use the DCI so that he can settle political scores. So that is a score for me. And that is a score. And perhaps just to return a little on the issue of the Naivasha port, I think the president needs to be advised even more. Because, we have national values, especially on public participation. Yes. So that he just became president yesterday, at least officially. So we need to know at what point was there public participation, surely, so that he has now resolved.
Yes, and actually we will be talking about public participation, because it's something that he also raised in terms of how we share resources, in terms of how we work around the government. But now, having an independent and an autonomous NPS, National Police Service, what happens to the CS, Interior, if at all you be having that ministry? Of course, there will be a minister who will be, or cabinet secretary who will be in charge of matter security and perhaps interior and coordination of national government. But at the end of the day, now we'll be having an independent NPS, and we have a CS who will be under the executive. How will that play out? Are we likely perhaps to see some disagreements? Because this is an autonomous body, but we have a CS who is under the executive.
Yes, you see, the expectations of the constitutional design or the framers of the constitution is that we need independent arms of government or independent offices, but working in committee. There must be some level of cooperation, so that if there is some level of disagreement between you, your office, and my office, it must be clearly drawn, so that we are able to identify who has caused this issue. I mean, the disagreements will never leave us alone. They are supposed to be there. In any event, we need to understand that we need to disagree in an agreeable manner, so that we know that our point of departure is this extent to this extent. Really, when you want to reflect very deeply about the future of the CS Interior and the IG, I think they are both meant to work professionally. There are expectations that the IG has some expectations that I should only do what the law requires me to do. The CAS is just there to ensure that if there are any government functions that need, police, the enforcement or by the police, they need, the security from the police, because the police is essentially meant to ensure that you protect human beings and you protect property.
Yes.
So that if there is any threat to property of any individual, then the CS should be there to coordinate. They should be working together. There should not be a level of who is bigger than the other one. No. So that you are enjoying a constitutional position, I'm equally enjoying a constitutional position. You need to do your work as the law requires. I also need to do my work as the law requires. So that ultimately, if Kenyans, because it is the Kenyans who have employed these people,
yes,
if Kenyans have a question as to what you are doing, if people have some queries as to your level of competence, then it should be measured as against your role and the role that the responsibility that you're discharging as far as the Constitution is concerned.
Yes, and Daktari, let's now look at something that Kenyans were waiting for and a little bit concerned, the cost of living. And today we are expecting EPRA to announce new fuel prices. They might decide perhaps to bring it down, but looking at how things are at the Gulf and also the Ukrainian war, we do not expect a reprieve at the pump. But the president did talk about that, and he said that indeed the fuel subsidy is not tenable. And indeed it is true, looking at what economists are talking about and the money that we've spent. He's talking about if we continue this, we will end up having eaten all the development budget. But at the end of the day, if we are going to scrap off this fuel subsidy, the fuel prices, the pump prices will hit 200 plus, of which that will not be something that Kenyans will welcome, and is not something that will bring the cost of living down.
Yes, Njue, let me before I answer that question, let me just add something onto what my colleague has mentioned about the issues about the balance of power between the CS and the interior if the NPS is well funded and independent. You know, the whole question is about defining mandates and what really are you supposed to do, because when you look at the role of the CS, it should be purely policy at the national level and giving guidelines as to the framework of engagement. Do we need to develop newer amendments that may help the National Police Service to work, and do these things need to be advocated for at the cabinet level or at the or even presented at some other national committees, or do they need more budgets? So I think that their mandates are pretty clear and if the NPS is strengthened, there will not really be a lot of overlaps. I think the challenge is that we are coming from a past where a CS for Interior was a very strong and powerful person. And the only other challenge that any leader would always deal with and always have to grapple with, and even the powers that be will have to grapple with, is that how do you deal with an extremely powerful security organ? They can be so powerful beyond you. You can empower them until they become too powerful beyond you. So those are issues that any government or any agency will have to be worried about. Now, on to the cost of living, these are really pertinent questions, and the ordinary Kenyans had got very high expectations. They have very high expectations because the platform of discourse, the political discourse in this election was economics. And, each and every politician was coming up with ways in which we can reduce the cost of living and just revamp our economy into the path of progress. So there is very high expectations amongst the public, and I think that the head of state is privy to some of these things. And now the issue is that the people will never really know what it takes to do certain things. Kenyans, and like any other electorate, will ideally be happy when fuel gets to 20 shillings a litre. But how practical it is, It's not practical. So you will find that one of the things that now, when you read through the speech of the head of state, he is trying to, there are certain things that Kenyans are expecting, and some of the things that he had mentioned during his campaign, and he's seeing the systems and how the reality of how things are now. So he has to find a way of managing that, all right? So one of the things that he was already trying to manage is that, you know what, the subsidy is expensive, you know, it's not sustainable. So it means that even if the cost of fuel rises, understand that we have to deal with the question of the unsustainable subsidy.
So more or less, he was telling Kenyans to brace for some tougher times to come as we wait for things to to solidify and life to be a little bit better.
That is what I expect him to do a lot, because campaigns are different from implementation. In campaigns, you'll give all the sweets, but when you get down to implementation, you realize that there is no sweet at all. And you now have to find a way of managing the expectation of the electorate to still get to the point where they still believe you are delivering and you will deliver the promises. But these things, they don't come just one night. They take time. So he's already on the path of trying to manage those expectations and trying to just set foot forward to make things, you know, get Kenyans know that, you know, there are things that need to be done, but it's not going to be done instantly. It's going to take some time, but we need to move into this journey together.
Yes, and talking of the journey together, there is actually the diaspora who really boosted Kenya, and when we came to the COVID-19, they really boosted the Kenyan economy that was really battered by the effects of the pandemic. And talking of the diaspora, we will be, in the next hour, we will be talking to two Kenyans who are, and they were following up keenly on what the president had to talk about. And before, during the pre-election, he talked about making or forming a diaspora ministry on making the diaspora a little bit more prominent in his government. We'll be talking about that in the next couple of minutes. But first things first, let's have that quick break. I'm with Shadrack, Wambui, an advocate of the High Court and a constitutional lawyer, and also Churchill Saoke, who is a leadership and governance expert, and also he is a lecturer at the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. Let's have that break. On this other side of the break, more discussion.
Daniel Doroitich Arab Moi